I've shared the live link in the Meet chat itself.
Got it. Thank you.
I'll start in 30 seconds then.
Got it.
All right, I guess I'll start. Good evening, everyone. My name is Abhishek Jain, and I'm pleased to invite you all to Plant's session on pursuing a MALD degree or a Master of Arts in Law and Diplomacy. Towards the end of the session, we will also be having a Q&A session for which I would request you all to put your questions in the live chat box. Today, we are very fortunate to have with us Manaved Nambiar, a graduate of the 2017 batch of Amity Law School, who then went on to pursue a MALD degree from the Fletcher School at Tufts University in 2020. He has numerous publications and is also the recipient of many prestigious awards. In this session, Manaved will be speaking in detail on the application process for a MALD, as well as the opportunities available after completing this degree. I would now like to hand it over to Manaved to begin the session.
Perfect. Thank you. So, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us. And before we, go any further, I'll just run through what all I plan to touch upon in this presentation. I'll introduce myself in a bit, but before that, I'll just run through what we plan to do. So first, I'll talk about Fletcher, what it stands for, what it is, what's the deal with it. Then I'll talk about the MALD, the Master of Arts in Law and Diplomacy in particular. It's the flagship program of Fletcher, and I'll touch upon a few topics related to that. Then I will talk about who should apply. Are you a potential candidate for Fletcher? And I'll also talk about when to apply, because there are certain things which you can't find in the websites, which might be useful here. Finally, I'll also talk about how to apply, which is basically I'll go over every application element and give you my perspective. I was in the admissions committee in my second year, and I'll also try and give you information which you cannot find out online. Followed by my experience regarding the application process, how I applied, and this particular segment I will focus on other colleges that I applied to as well, in case you want a more general understanding. I'll also close with some general tips on how to apply, because there are some things which just make your life easier. And my final topic would be life at Fletcher, and I can talk for hours on that topic, but I'll keep it short, and we should be done in about 40 to 45 minutes. Again, my name is Manaved Nambiar. Right now, I'm a Master of Arts in Law and Diplomacy graduate. I graduated from law school in 2017, like many other people. And during law school, I'll talk a bit about what I did in law school, which helped me, as a slightly younger candidate, get into a good graduate school. First things first, make sure your academics, it's not too bad. It has to be at least over 60 or 65%. Make sure you participate in a lot of extracurricular activities. You have 5 years, make sure you participate in at least one of everything and try to win a few competitions. It really helps the process if you win stuff. Of course, like you have the usual suspects like moods, MUNs, and all that stuff, but also like try out other stuff. Maybe like a creative writing competition, because honestly, I believe that the more diverse a particular application is, the higher it gets looked at by the admissions committee. So law school was really nice. I realized pretty early on that I don't want to pursue pure law. I'm more of a policy sort of person. So during my third and fourth year, I slowly started doing internships, which were more geared towards policy. I interned at the UN. I interned at the Diplomatic Affairs Department of the Hindu, which is a national newspaper. And I also interned at, this environmental law firm, just to, promote like my views in the environment. So one thing about law school is that make sure you intern at a variety of places, not because of to find out the things you want to do, but rather to find out what you don't want to do. So I interned at a law firm early on. I figured it out pretty easily that that is not my cup of tea. I respect those who want to do it, and it's it's difficult work, but litigation and the corporate life, it wasn't for me. And I got enamored by the United Nations pretty early on. So by the time I was in my fifth year, I had done a couple of internships focusing on international humanitarian law, and I'd done a couple of moods focusing on international affairs. So basically, my CV was slightly trending towards the study of international affairs. After that, I graduated in 2017, and by the end of 2017, I was interning at the UN Women headquarters in New York, and that's where I that is probably my first employment, so to speak, because I had a larger than usual responsibility. I had a law degree, of course, and I learned the ins and outs of the UN system. And I also, at the same time, I was also the editor for this magazine in New York, which dealt with feminist issues called Her Culture. And obviously, those two things went hand in hand, UN Women and Her Culture. And by the end of my contract there, I have worked there for 7.5 months. And by the end of my contract there, I was pretty confident that I'd done a good job, and I want to, continue to work. Graduate school was not in my plans, but they told me, the higher ups, they told me that you need a graduate degree, not only in the United Nations, but eventually, if you want to have a career in public policy or international affairs, a graduate degree is essential. So I shortlisted a few colleges. I'll talk about that process later in this talk. And I shortlisted a few colleges, applied to a few of them, got accepted to the ones I applied to, and finally chose Fletcher, which was in my, among my top choices. And at Fletcher, it's a beautiful place. It's a brilliant place, and the level of education and camaraderie that I encountered, probably the 2 best years of my life. And in Fletcher, I focused on international security studies and international organizations. I was also the head of the UN club, because as you see, I'm slowly building up my CV, to trend towards the United Nations, which is where I want to end up in eventually. I'll talk about that soon. But at Fletcher, I then graduated in 2020. And now I'm waiting to go to Africa, hopefully to start a field career in the UN Peacekeeping Division, and then figure out my plans for later. My plans for after would be, I'm 25 right now. Again, you will notice that I'm one of the younger people that you might see applying for grad school. Usually people apply with 2 to 3 years of work experience, and they're usually around 24 to 25 years old. But again, I want to spend the next 10 years or 15 years on the field, get some experience, and then move to a city where the UN has a headquarters presence, and then work my way through the office. So that's all for, as a matter of introduction, that would be all. But now I'll talk about Fletcher. So Fletcher, it's the oldest graduate school for international affairs in the US. It was established in 1933 by Tufts University and Harvard. And there's this thing called the Fletcher Mafia that I want to talk about. That's, if someone applies to Fletcher, this is a word that they might encounter from time to time while talking to alumni. And it's basically, a very powerful group of alumni at different levels, and in different places, who really help each other out along with other new recruits. So how do I phrase this? It's basically, like the fundamental cornerstone of what being a Fletcher graduate is that you always get help from people who graduated from Fletcher. And in a field like diplomacy and international affairs, it's really, really useful. Like that's probably the most useful thing in diplomacy. And again, like another thing that stands out about Fletcher is the professors. They are brilliant, especially with the small class sizes. The student to faculty ratio, it's really, really nice. So that is something you should consider. If you have to choose between different colleges, you should really consider the student to faculty ratio. And it's highly diverse. I think that is one way it is very different from many other colleges, many other elite colleges. It's very, very different, not only geographically. Obviously you have a bunch of people from different nations, but it's also very diverse professionally. You will have a person who who owns a shoe company studying with a person who was the head of a mission in the DRC, and they'll all be studying together, obviously at different subjects and different fields of study, which I'll talk about soon. But it's a very diverse background. And with diversity, thankfully there also comes inclusivity, which you'll see. There's clubs for everything. Everyone who wants to be identified as as part of a group is allowed to do so, and there's a lot of respect for each other. And Fletcher has a bunch of degrees. I'll be talking about the Master of Arts in Law and Diplomacy, also known as the MALD. But the other degrees, I'll just go through them in case you might be interested. There's the Masters in International Business, which is the MIB, the LLM, which is a one-year course. It's also a great course. And the mid-career MA. There's also the Global Master of Arts program, the GMAP, but it's usually for senior professionals. Now, I'll start to slowly focus on talking about the MALD specifically. In their website, Fletcher defines a MALD student as devoted to working in an international environment and grappling with the complex global issues that affect the public, non-profit, and private sectors. They are energized by global events and have a strong commitment to transforming their world. This definition, I can personally vouch for it, stands true. I have met a lot of brilliant people during my time there. And really, these are people who want to make the world a better place and are change makers. Obviously, these are all technicalities, because at the end of the day, if you have the, if you have the drive, you can actually do what you want. But at the same time, being a MALD student, it makes it easier for you to achieve it. Now, before we go into the technicalities of, what you have to do as a MALD student, I was told by the MALD, about the MALD by many of my former supervisors in different places, especially in the Diplomatic Affairs Office of the Hindu and during my UN internships. So it's a very well-known sort of, degree. It's not like you won't have to explain yourself to the people who make those decisions, right? So good things, I really heard good things from mid-career and senior professionals about the MALD specifically, and these are the people who make employment decisions. So there's definitely some reservation that the Fletcher MALD is not as known in India, because it's a very specific sort of degree. But the people who need to know, and it has a very storied history. And the biggest advantage is that it is highly customizable for your future career goals. This is where I think the fields of study part comes in. Every MALD student has to do a minimum of 2 fields of study. And fields of study are basically the building blocks of the Fletcher curriculum. Fields enable students to develop a specific set of skills related to a functional topic or a geographical area. And MALD students, again, as I told you, have to have 2 required fields of study. And you can also design your own field of study. It's slightly rare, you have to petition, but it usually works out. Suppose you don't want to study peacekeeping and gender, and instead you want to focus on space law, you can petition to design your own field of study. Finally, there are a lot of region-specific courses. This would be very important no matter where you apply. So make sure you have some sort of regional concentration in mind. For example, my general focus is peacekeeping, and most peacekeeping missions are in Africa. So at Fletcher, I took a class titled Conflict in Africa, which really adds to your view of how you view things. It's a very holistic development that Fletcher does. So wherever you go, make sure you take regional focus classes, especially because you'll be, as a policymaker, you'll usually be, making decisions for places you've never lived in. And quant experience in the MALD, it's not essential while starting out, but you will build it over the course of your Fletcher experience. I personally am not a fan of quant work, but the requirements at Fletcher, it basically ensured that I left with a basic understanding of many things related to data and data analysis. So even if you're like me, and you're not much of a quant fan, you're pure law, diplomacy sort of person, even then you'll come out of Fletcher in the MALD with a basic understanding of quant. And of course, even if you're quant focused yourself, there are a lot of higher level courses which you can look into. And all MALD students have to complete a capstone. It can be anything as long as it serves a purpose. I know a friend who did an excellent TEDx presentation for his capstone. I know others who did a weekly podcast for their capstone. But I took the more traditional route and wrote a paper on global arms trade. But you basically can do anything as long as you have the blessings of your advisor, and it's a very detailed analysis of a subject area. Another thing that I want to discuss is cross-registration. So 25% of your classes can be taken at nearby schools. So there are a lot of people who cross-register. So basically, if you have 4 semesters, 1 semester can be done at a different school altogether. I personally took controlling the world's most dangerous weapons class at Harvard Kennedy School, which is right around the corner. It's a couple of metro stations away. And there's a lot of other people who take different classes at Boston University, Harvard, and that's a big option you have, which brings me to to one of the biggest advantages of being in that area, in the Boston area, that you're surrounded by a completely academic setting and you're exposed to so many different options. So it doesn't matter where you end up in. If you're in the Boston area and you're studying there, that's, a big advantage. And the academic culture of Boston, as I was talking about, it really helps if you're a student. Fletcher itself has events on a daily basis. But if you want to get out of the proverbial Fletcher bubble, then it also makes sense to go to different places. Take the metro, go a couple of stops to Harvard or MIT. They'll also be having events, and oftentimes you'll have a very close-knit academic community in the first few months that you're there. And finally, penultimately, research centers are also available for specific subjects. There's different research centers headed by different faculty, which deal with specific research. And many of my batchmates, they were research assistants for projects which they could then write on their CV. So, for example, if you're interested in the Middle East, then you can work in the Ferris Research Center under a professor, and make your name, of course, in the field, but also learn a lot when out of class learning, right? And then use that to get a job later on. Talking about jobs, Fletcher has this professional development program. It is excellent for job seekers. So basically, all the new recruits to the MALD, in the morning, you have the Office of Career Services, which is a very well-run organization under Fletcher, and they teach you the ins and outs of getting a job as a future policymaker. In fact, as anything you want to be in the future, it's a very customizable sort of plan, and you get to know the ins and outs of how to get a job. Not only do they hold sessions in the morning, you can also opt for personalized interviews, interview trainings, and they look over your CV. In fact, all of us have to submit our CV. We have to make our CVs perfect before we are even allowed to get inside Fletcher. And they also hold 2 career treks, one to New York and one to Washington, DC, once every year. And so basically what happens is that a bunch of people, those who want to go, they're selected, and we all reach New York or Washington, which is something I'll talk about later. But we just reach there, and there's different tables with different sectors that you might be interested in, and those tables are filled with Fletcher alumni in high-level positions. And you reach out to them, you talk to them, you network, and most people come out with an internship or 2. And Overall, the MALD is it's a very it has been very useful for me. I'll talk about how it has specifically been useful for me later. But if you have any questions about, the MALD course, do let me know at the end of the live stream. Now I'll talk about who should apply. It's a very difficult question when it comes to policy making. I will stick to the domain of law, especially lawyers from the global south, places like India. So I'll tell you why I applied. So as I told you, once my internship thing at the UN ended, I asked for a more permanent sort of place, but they told me I need a graduate degree. So, I was pretty quick to assume that that's what I need to do next. I researched a lot. I basically just Googled, best graduate school of international affairs in the world. And obviously I had, like, during my time at different organizations, I'd heard these names by word of mouth: Fletcher, SIPA, Harvard, all these places. And I made a list of about 40 to 50 colleges, and I slowly shortlisted them over the course of the next few weeks. And by the time I had about 7 or 8 left, I asked my mentors. I made a list of 10 people who I admire, professionally speaking, who are in places where I want to be later. And I asked them to, as a favor, ask them to rank the colleges, the list of 10 colleges. And after doing, a bit of, like some Excel magic, if you want to call that, I ended up with, rank 1 being Fletcher. So when I saw that the people who are where I want to be are, especially within the United Nations system, are all ranking Fletcher so highly, like it automatically, it was already, one of my favorite colleges. The MALD was in my top plans. But after I saw that, other people also ranked it highly, I went for it, without any further ado. And I was very glad when I got accepted. So no matter where you apply, make sure you talk to people, like mentors and just like supervisors, people who are in positions where you see yourself in 10 to 20 years. Ask them, without telling them where you got in, so that it's an unbiased answer. Ask them, what do they think of this college? And another thing that I thought about when applying to Fletcher is that I wanted a place to study my craft properly. I was in New York. It's a very distracting city, and I just wanted, Fletcher is located in Medford, which is on the outskirts of Boston. It's a very quaint little place, very nice, very, it's not remote or anything. It is definitely, slightly less bustling than New York. And I wanted a place personally to practice my craft and, create meaningful relationships. It's very important in the long road of a diplomatic career that you have a very strong, friendly group of people. There are some colleges which are, like in the heart of the city, but the campus is, it's not collective. So if you want that, of course, I respect that. But if you want something, where there's a smaller group of people, but who are like more close to each other, then Fletcher might be the place for you. And, I firmly believe that policy and law go hand in hand, and Fletcher is the place to see that happening. And broadly speaking, if you want to keep your law background in your arsenal and yet want to transition to policy making, then the MALD is the course for you. At the same time, the sheer variety of people doing the MALD, it's ridiculous, and they are all trailblazers in the field. It's not only for people who are into law and diplomacy, it's for everyone who think that they can use both of those elements to create a more meaningful world. I really encourage you to go to a website and look at the descriptions of the people there. So every year a few people are featured on our website, where they came from, what they're doing, what their plans are, and that will give you an idea of what an average class looks like. And when it comes to what people do after Fletcher, there's a very equitable distribution. There's like 33% INGOs, about 34% government officials, and the rest, in the private sector. So there's something for everyone. And in fact, the Office of Career Services, it has 3 different departments. One is for the INGOs like the UN and the WTO or the World Bank, and one is for private sector people, and the third one is for government affairs. So yeah, there's that. And when you're applying to Fletcher, like, I'll tell you a few things which are looked favorably. As I said earlier, I was part of the admissions committee, and during my talks and during my own application process, I saw a few things which I thought I should highlight. First of all, definitely have an year or two of work experience. It's very rare to actually go to Fletcher right after college. It's pretty rare, and you might also not find it as useful as you would have if you were slightly older with some amount of work experience under your belt. And international experience, again, that is looked favorably, but it doesn't discount anyone from going there. It's a very inclusive space, and if someone doesn't have international experience due to some reason, it doesn't matter much. But if you have some and you can show how that makes you a better person, that's really looked upon favorably. Linguistic skill, as Indians, we are usually bilingual. So if you have a strong command over different languages, that'll also be looked very favorably. Other than that, the admissions committee is very capable, and even though the applicants come from a wide range of backgrounds, the cohort that they select is usually quite impressive. And I'll also talk quickly about when to apply. Application deadlines for the MALD program are as follows. October 10th is the spring enrollment application deadline. November 10th is the fall enrollment early notification deadline. January 10th is the fall enrollment scholarship priority deadline, and February 20th is coming along is the fall enrollment round 3 deadline. April 1st is the fall enrollment round 4 deadline. One thing that is very important is do not even consider the round 2, round 3 deadlines at all. Make sure you apply, right before the scholarship deadline at least. The school is, comparatively very gracious with scholarships. Most of the people at Fletcher have some form of scholarship. So make sure you apply by the deadline and you get the scholarship that you deserve. And yeah, it's the scholarship part. I would also like to mention that even if you apply for a scholarship and you get an amount, let's suppose you get $5,000 in the first year. If you do well in your academics and are a good student, generally speaking, which most of us are, you get an extension to your scholarship. You have to apply for a scholarship renewal, and they increase your scholarship if you've done well. So that's something to think about. And the Fletcher scholarship is very competitive. So competitive as in when compared to other scholarships, as in it's much better than other scholarships, although it's not as difficult to get it because they're very kind with the distribution of the money. Now I'll talk about how to apply. The process is completely online, although if you have a bad net connection or something, you can mail the admissions team to ask for a paper application. That also works, but it's very rarely done. Two important things that I want to flag before we talk about the application process. The GRE is no longer essential, and the TOEFL or the IELTS is required if the native language is not English. Application fee is $80, and there's a fee waiver eligibility. Obviously, if you have some sort of issue, a monetary issue, then you can mail the admissions office with proof of your problem. And I've heard stories that they often they're fine with if you're not able to pay the $80 fee. Also, Teach for India scholars don't have to pay this, and Map Your Future candidates don't have to pay this. Quick segue into Map Your Future. So basically, it's for younger candidates who just graduated, and you can apply to the Map Your Future pathway. And if you get selected, you basically sign a contract saying that I will join Fletcher in 2 years from now, but for those 2 years, I will work at an organization that is recommended by Fletcher. And I won't touch upon that too much. If you want to know more about it, you have the website. And if you want to know some more details, definitely reach out to me at any point. But yeah, the Map Your Future pathway is something that you can look into if you're slightly on the younger side. You also need official academic transcripts. They are usually scanned, and 2 letters of recommendation. It doesn't specify here, but usually it's 1 academic and 1 professional. When you give 2 academic letters of recommendation, it makes it sound like, it doesn't look good because you need the professional recommendation as well. The essay, you have 2 essays. The second essay usually changes every year. The first essay is the primary statement of purpose. I mean, I won't go into the details of how to write a statement of purpose. That could be a whole presentation in itself. But Usually Fletcher asks you the goals for graduate study and for your career. Short term, I usually like suggest that you divide your goals into short term and long term goals when you're writing about your career. Describe the elements of your personal, professional, or academic background that prepares you for your career path. So you talk about the past, you talk about where you are, and you talk about how you will get where you want to get. And why have you selected the degree program for which you're applying? One thing I would suggest is make sure you read up on the history of whatever college you're applying to. It doesn't have to be Fletcher, because if you intimately know what a college is about, what it stands for, it'll seep into your statement of purpose. So make sure you read up on the history of wherever you're applying to. Essay 2 is the one that usually changes every year. Right now, it's basically like more of a window into the soul sort of essay. It's not professional. It's more like, for example, this year it's tell us about the city, town, or region that you consider to be your hometown. What makes this place special and how has it contributed to who you are now? Or describe an experience that contributed to your interest in the study of international affairs, or share an anecdote or details about an experience that you have not elaborated upon anywhere else in your application. So that's very open-ended, and that's basically for the admissions committee to see how authentic you are. And this is where authenticity comes in. I strongly suggest being honest about who you are. The readers usually see through any falsehoods. And I know like there are a lot of people out there who engage professional tutors for this kind of thing. But if it's not written from the heart, it's usually very evident to see, and it's caught. So definitely be honest about who you are and your goals, and you should definitely get in. You also have to submit a resume. In that case, I would strongly recommend submitting the format used by Fletcher students. Reach out to any Fletcher student. We have a very specific format that we use, that we learned in our aforementioned PDP courses. And yeah, I would recommend, like, wherever you apply, just use the format used by the students of the college you're applying to. The GMAT or GRE, as I said, is optional. And the evaluative interview, that is also optional. I personally recommend doing this if possible. Obviously, like, many of you might have to do it over FaceTime or over video calling, but I recommend doing this. I was an interviewer last year. The people who will be interviewing you are second-year students of the MALD course. And, not only will you get an idea of how well you might fit there, you'll also, you'll find someone who you can ask questions to. So definitely, try out for the optional interviews. And in fact, like 3 people who I interviewed last year made it into Fletcher. They got offers of admission. So there's that. And that's the whole process, basically. And it's pretty self-explanatory on the website. Again, this is something I'll reiterate throughout my presentation. If you have any doubts that you cannot clear on the website, feel free to reach out to me. I would love to help. And most important thing, it's like, if you have doubts, don't hesitate to contact the admissions office. They're exceedingly helpful. And because I remember, when I was applying, in my mind, I was like, I don't want to ask too many questions. I don't want to think, I don't want them to think that I'm incompetent, that I can't figure this out myself. But that is not what they're there for. They're really helpful. They're really nice people. I worked with all of them. And Fletcher specifically, like, ask as many questions as you want. There's a dedicated team of, assistants who are just waiting to answer your calls. And they especially understand the international element of things. It's more difficult as an international student to go through all this. So definitely feel free to ask for help at any point. And I would recommend that for any college. My experience regarding I'll talk about my experience regarding the application process specifically. Out of all the colleges, the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy's application process was, probably the most streamlined for me. Moreover, everyone I reached out to was very helpful. And that was true for many colleges that I applied to. And they especially, like, as I was talking before, they know the troubles that one might encounter as an international student, starting from the transcripts to the visa. Make sure you are in communication with people, and also understand that if something goes wrong, something logistically goes wrong, it is not a problem. They're very adjusting. And, like, even if a visa doesn't come through, like, we're a school of diplomacy. Like, I remember a student who couldn't get the visa, but, like, she was offered admission and someone had contacts within the visa office and she eventually got issued a visa. So, like that's an advantage of being in a school of diplomacy, that you usually have someone who helps things, move smoothly. Once I got admitted, that was also very nice. Fletcher alumni and a couple of faculty members reached out to me and congratulated me. And, one of them even sent me a congratulatory postcard. I know like these things are very, these things are intangibles. It doesn't really matter. But, when I was told that Fletcher really, takes care of its own, that's, when it started happening to me. And that is something that, if you prefer that kind of environment, then Fletcher, the MALD is the place for you to be. And also, it's a side note. I don't know if it's really applicable. If possible, try to go to the admitted students day to each of the colleges. I made my final decision after visiting Fletcher and talking to people face to face. Like, it's quite simply, I visited other colleges. I won't name them. But the community vibe and the enthusiasm at Fletcher, it really blew me away. And I didn't think twice. I just signed up and I told them that I'm coming in the next class. I'll also talk about a few general tips. Divide your, when you're applying, this is not Fletcher specific, divide your potential colleges into tiers, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, so that like one of them, like colleges you really want to go to but which are difficult to get in, colleges which are medium level of difficulty but you still won't mind going to them, and safe colleges where you will get in, but these are still like not bad colleges. And obviously like if you divide your efforts and time based on that, it'll be really useful in the long run. The question of if you want to go to a European college or a US college, for me, the answer was pretty simple, because the UN, like I wanted to be in a place which had a long tradition and a strong alumni. And most US colleges I found were like, fit that criteria. So that is my personal reason, but there are people who prefer European colleges. It's slightly less expensive, and like it's slightly lesser people there. So that's up to you, but you definitely have to consider that. And another thing I did was send an inquiry letter to professors. This is before you are offered admission and while you're applying. Just send an inquiry letter to a professor whose work you like, and just let them know that. Don't like say that I'm applying to Fletcher like or any other place, like help me get in. Just let them know that you read their work and that like if like you're interested in doing this and this, and how it like how it all comes together and all that stuff. So you can't outrightly ask them to help you. They won't, but definitely like write an inquiry letter to the professor and find out what research they're planning on doing. Just get in touch with them, make sure they remember your name, and reach out to at least one student from each college you're applying to. LinkedIn will be your friend here. And honestly, like that is probably one of the most important things I did. I had a few friends in different colleges, but also I reached out to a couple of alumni, and the way they responded really shaped my view of the college they went to. And make sure you're clear about your general area of work in your application. This is like applicable to Fletcher and other colleges. So like I know many of us might not be sure of what we want to do after grad school, and that is fine, or even during grad school, and that's completely fine. It is better to not know than to know the wrong thing. So, but at the same time, when you're applying, make sure like that you write what you want to do, because like, and I would suggest that that should be one of your strengths. And because once you're in once you're in graduate school, you can change that to fit what you actually want to do, and you will probably change it. I wasn't much of a peacekeeping guy until my second semester at Fletcher, when I took peacekeeping operations under Professor Cerrone. So one thing I would strongly recommend is make sure that your area of interest is clear and evident in your application. Start the application an year in advance if possible. I was slightly later in starting my application. I had to not rush through it, but like it made me slightly more anxious than I needed to be. So make sure you start your application about an year before you do it. This is especially important because scholarship applications also take up a lot of time, and they also start about a year before that. Divide your colleges by phases of application. Like apply to the important colleges first. Make sure you get the scholarship deadlines out, and wait for the your safe colleges in tier 3, make sure you wait for them like until the end, because for all you know, you might get into the good ones. Now, I'll talk about life at Fletcher really quickly. Obviously, I could speak for hours on this specific topic. As you might have surmised, a common theme is the close-knit community at Fletcher. Everyone usually knows each other, and everyone's very friendly with each other. In the first year, most international students live right next to Fletcher in this, very Harry Potter-esque dormitory called Blakely Hall, and that is, like your first introduction to Fletcher if you're an international student, and it's an absolutely brilliant place. You make friends for life, and I know it sounds cliched, but like you can ask anyone and they'll vouch for it. And there are events almost every day and a bunch of traditions, which have stood the test of time. So many things: the diplomats ball, the ski trip, treks to different countries, Fletcher feasts, fiesta nights, get-togethers every other night, sports, music, theater, you have it all. And like by the end of 2 years, you'll have like grown obviously academically, but also culturally as well, along with a bunch of new friends. And combine that with what is arguably one of the most happening academic areas in the world, you have an insane 2 years. This brings me again to why Medford is a great place for me specifically. I didn't get too distracted by the city life. You really feel like you belong there, and Fletcher has great leadership. Like since like we have had really brilliant deans, and the current dean, Rachel Kite, she's really helpful. She's a students person, and she's a Fletcher alumnus herself, and she's really helpful. And across all sectors of Fletcher, you'll see instances of great leadership. When it comes to think tanks, like Fletcher is really well located. Boston has a bunch of think tanks, and many people intern there during the summer. And it's also really close to, comparatively close to DC and New York. So I used to, in my second semester, take the bus. So my classes were on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. I took the bus at night on Thursday, and you reach New York by Friday early morning. Oh, sorry, I took the bus Wednesday night, reach New York by Thursday early morning, work for 2 days, and come back, in time for the classes to start again. So if you have some sort of internship in New York, that is something you can look into. And DC itself, again, it's not that far away. It's a couple of hours by plane and a few more hours by bus. So DC and New York are not that far that they're inaccessible, but they're far enough that they're not a distraction. Now I'll talk a bit about the skills and opportunities that I acquired after the MALD. Fundamentally, you need a graduate degree to enter the policy market. The UN has it mandatorily, and in other places, it's quite implicit. After Fletcher, I'm much more knowledgeable about the world and on how to think of the challenges facing it. I'll be honest with you, the law background helped immensely, especially in the legal classes. So, if you're lawyers specifically who are applying to the Master of Arts in Law and Diplomacy, you'll find it very useful, for the transition into diplomacy. Quantitative wise, while I don't think I'll ever consider myself an expert, I'm much more comfortable with it due to the multiple courses and weekend certificate programs offered by Fletcher. This, like quick digression, basically whatever you want to learn at Fletcher, when you're there, it'll be done. There's a course for everything. There are programs for everything. And if by some rare chance you're not able to find something in Fletcher, you have a bunch of other colleges right in the neighborhood to choose from. And, like honestly, the most important thing though, perhaps most importantly, Fletcher opened many doors which I closed earlier by dint of its active alumni, its excellent reputation, and its brilliant education. So I think personally for me, like that is the cornerstone of Fletcher. You have a bunch of alumni who are really helpful to those who graduated from Fletcher. And I've seen that myself, obviously, and I've seen people being helped through that. So that's all, generally speaking. One presentation is not enough to go into the details of everything. I understand that, but I hope I was able to convey some key points. Thank you for listening, and don't hesitate to reach out later on LinkedIn if you have any doubts there. I'll be staying back to answer questions, but if someone missed the live stream, that's fine. Feel free to reach out to me anytime. I'd be glad to help you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Manaved. I think that was a very, very good session. And thanks for explaining in detail everything from the application process to life at Fletcher. So thanks a lot for that. We
Thank
do
you.
have a couple of interesting questions. The first question that I want to ask you is actually one of the most obvious questions that I think most law students have when they are trying to actually decide what to do.
Mhm.
So an MALD is actually a 2-year program, if I understand correctly, as
That's
opposed to
correct.
most LLMs, which are just for 1 year.
Yeah.
So, do you think it's justified to actually spend that extra year? And also, in terms of, let's say, prospects that it opens up, is it
Mhm.
better than LLMs, or how would you compare it?
Right. That's a great question. So I'll first answer that. I first answer the first part of the question, as I understand that the MALD, like, is it good? Like, if it's a 2-year degree, and I say, with with personal experience, that I have had friends who did the LLM, and obviously they left just after 9 months, and especially if you're young, 9 months is not enough to to learn as much as you want to, so the Master of Arts in Law and Diplomacy, like it's a 2-year course, and you can get really deep into what you want to study. And although, like, on the other hand, the LLM, I know, like, there are people who might be like, slightly more in a hurry. The LLM exists, and if I'm not wrong, Fletcher is considering a mini MALD. It's called the Master of Arts and Master of Global Affairs, the MGA. So if you want a slightly condensed MALD, then you can look at that option as well. But at the end of the day, the MALD, the MALD, is the flagship, and it's known as an industry standard throughout different sectors. Like the United Nations, the World Bank. People know about the MALD, and that the 2 years it takes is like what it takes to get the degree. So those are the things that you'll have to uh, calculate against each other before making a decision on where you want to go. At the end of the day, like, both of those degrees are really nice, the LLM, the MALD, and there's virtually no difference other than the fact that the LLMs, leave us slightly sooner than the MALDs.
All right, if I could just ask a follow up to that.
Yeah.
So, in terms, like, so if I understand that an MLD is actually very, very focused in a particular area, so how exactly do you think a law student straight out of law school could decide that, okay, the MALD is something I would rather want to do, given that when we're making this choice compared to an LLM
Yeah.
isn't something they've already studied. So,
Yeah. Right. Yeah, that's a great question. So the MLD, if when compared to the LLM, it's for people who want to slightly go away from the legal focus to a more policy focus. That is the fundamental difference, according to me. Obviously, it's a very personal opinion, but I personally chose the MALD, obviously because of its history, but also because of the fact that I want to eventually transition into diplomacy. The law is not going to be the cornerstone of my identity, although I had a great time studying it, and it'll always be useful for the rest of my life. My career will probably revolve more around diplomacy with enough law in it to make it interesting. So in that case, like, the MALD was a smart move for me. But if someone wants to, like, what do you call it? Focus completely more on the law space, then the LLM might be useful. But then again, you have to think, like, would you want to, like, go all the way there just to be there for 9 months, because it passes really quickly? And that is another reason why I would, like, recommend the MALD if you have some more time.
all right. I think that definitely answers that question. I think this brings me to my last question. And this is actually something you spoke about. So, you spoke about the whole concept of optional interviews and about how you also got to take you got to take a few interviews last year. Could you just probably elaborate a little bit about what you think a good interview looks like, and how do you think a student could probably prepare for interviews for the MALD?
Okay. 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 Perfect. So, an optional interview is basically very evaluative in nature. We have a set of questions that we ask the students. Um, why do you want to do this course? What are your plans? It's basically like an SOP, but an interactive one. So I think the best students that I saw were confident in what they wanted to do. They were not unduly, like, they were just normal. They were speaking normally. They were not, too robotic. They knew what they wanted to do, and they could convey that quite easily, just by using a few words. There were no prepared speeches. There were no pre-planned statements that were made. Like it was mostly like a conversation between two people, a second year MALD student and a student who wants to get in. It's very friendly, and if anyone decides to do the interview in the future, make sure, like, it's a very friendly thing. The other person wants to help you. They were in the same position, a couple of years ago. So be very, calm, know what you want, know why you like Fletcher, and yeah, smile.
All right. Actually, I think those are some very interesting tips. So thanks for that.
Yeah.
I think that brings us to the end of the session, Manaved. So I just want to take this opportunity to thank you for taking out the time to actually come for this session. So thanks once again, Manaved. It was a very, very good session.
Thank you
and
so
I'm sure
much.
that it's been very
Yeah.
useful for a lot of students.
Thank you so much. I hope it's helpful. And again, as I said before, don't, hesitate to reach out. If you have any questions, even after this live stream is over, I'm on LinkedIn. And thanks to Plan T for organizing this. I'm sure they'll do big things in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.